Thanks very much for being here. My name is Ian Skellern. I'm the co-founder and technical editor of the watch blog quillandpad.com. And I have a particular interest in innovation in watchmaking, which is probably why I'm here. We have three people here that probably know as much as anybody about innovative watchmaking, and that's particularly interesting, I think, because especially fine watchmaking, it's one of the most traditional, uninnovative, generally, domains you can work in. Most watches they're making today are exactly the same or very similar to watches that were made 50 years ago or even 100 years ago. No, I've already got my panel discussed. So here we have Mr. Stephen Forsey, co-founder with Robert Grobel of Grobel Forsey. Arguably, but not by anybody in this room, the finest watch brand in the world, I would say. Mr. Felix Baumgartner, who comes from a long line of many generations of watchmakers. So we might think of Felix as the most traditional of watchmakers. However, because he was so steeped in tradition, that encouraged him to break out and do something very different. Grobel Forsey is innovating in terms of precision, high precision watchmaking. Urwerk is innovating in terms of certainly design of cases. And then we have Alexis Georgiokopoulos, the director of the Lausanne, ICAL, the Lausanne Art and Design University. And he's, amongst other things, will be responsible for training. Some of his students will become watch designers, and the kind of technologies and the information the university is imparting to the students will certainly be having an influence on the future. My first question to the panel, though, traditional watchmaking is a fairly unchanging environment. Things move very slowly. Most watches are round with 2 or 3 hands. We've got the Grand Prix de Genève, the Oscars of watchmaking that just happened last week. They have prizes for brands that reinvent their past as if they need to be encouraged. There are many brands still making what to me are quite old-looking watches. So my first question of the panel is there any point in innovating? Do we need to do it? Stephen.
Thank you, Ian. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. So, well, innovation, it depends how we want to characterize that. We can innovate in many different areas in terms of materials. We can innovate in terms of mechanism. And is there a point? Well, I think if, as independent watchmakers, we are sitting here today with you, it means that, yes, there's a point definitely for us. It's our passion driving us to create, to innovate, to question what was done before, and to seek to bring something really new and different. But that doesn't stop us innovating in the sense to respect the tradition and to revive some traditional technique or details because they've been lost. So, and for yourselves as watch enthusiasts, collectors, and so on, you know, there's your interest. You want to discover something new, but maybe also something with a classical feel. So there's a wide possibility of innovation. Depends how you characterize it.
So yes, I would also I confirm, and I say even it's absolutely normal to innovate. You know, on cars, for example, on houses, on technology, on phones, on televisions, everywhere it goes on, history goes on. So why watchmaking, why fine watchmaking should stop? So actually it's just a normal thing that history has to go on. If not, if we stick to one rule and one tradition, actually we will die.
Okay, so you understood I'm not a watchmaker, just to clear things from the start, but we train designers, and these designers in some cases will become not necessarily watchmakers, but watch designers and even found their own companies. So of course it's very important that these young people don't do the same that what exists, but even go a lot further than that. And I would also speak about not just innovation in an object, but also the way that the young generation today can innovate in ways of, let's say, offering their products to the market, which I think is also another part where innovation today is an area that can be, I think, to work on.
And Stephen, you've been innovating at Global Forces since the beginning. What was the impetus to do that? What was the motivation? Rather than just, it would be easier just to make watches.
Yeah, it would certainly, it would surely have been easier to perhaps find an existing name and to regenerate the past in that way, but to revive that. But for Robert and myself, in fact, it's as Felix said, in a way it's natural for us as human beings to want to innovate, to want to question, to want to bring something new, to look at the past and then say, well, okay, that was then. Now today we are here. The situation is different, and what can we do? So it was really the founding ethos of Global Forces was to reject the notion that everything had been invented in watchmaking. As Ian said, in a way you could say that the mechanical watch has the same components that it had almost 500 years ago. But the differences are huge. We've come so far, and yet we believe certainly that we can go further. I think we share that with a number of our colleagues as well. So it was really that question to say, no, we reject that everything has been invented. We want to explore new frontier, we want to push the boundary, and we want to be able to embrace and bring the collectors and the watch enthusiasts with us on that journey.
And Felix, what was your motivation for creating Urwerk to make watches that look so different? And we should think, Urwerk was 20 years ago. We're a little bit more used to now seeing contemporary watches that look a bit wild, but when Urwerk started, a round watch was, if it had a bright color, that was exciting.
Yes, so at the time, 20 years ago, I was 22 years old. So the whole career before me, and I was questioning what can I bring to watchmaking and what do I want to do in watchmaking. So the answer was actually not immediately found, but then during parties with friends, my brother, my cousin, artist friend, artist actually, and friend Martin Fry. During parties, we started to think about, the values of watchmaking, of fine watchmaking. We could question these values a bit, because at the time in the 90s you had as many hands as possible on a dial, as many complications, high complications in a movement, and it was just for us a bit, okay, they are playing, but this is kind of the old generation showing the muscles. And we thought we have to research new values in bringing new aesthetic and a contemporary aesthetic, materials, technologies. So, that's my start.
Alexis, as somebody outside the industry, but obviously observing it closely, you must be well aware of the forces that are fighting between innovation in watchmaking and the fact that it's so traditional and classic. When we're in the industry, we are always hearing, nearly every press release, there's something innovative about the watch. It's probably the most overused word now in watchmaking. Do you see the watch industry really as an innovative industry, or just saying the words? Present company excluded.
Of course. Now, I think that it's also how you value innovation and what scale are we talking about. In the sense that a watch can bring an innovation which is like a very small detail, but which in the long term can have a huge impact on the industry itself. Or of course you can do a watch which is completely revolutionary, as for example Urwerk does, which of course is an innovation on its own. I think that it's also important to look at it. Maybe it's easier, of course, to look at it after a couple of years, or 5, 10, 20 years, and maybe see if there was a real impact or not. That's not easy, of course, because we have to let time go. I think that it's always very important to be, even if the word is overused, to at least use it, because I think then it decomplexes in a way the use of the word, and then at the end I think the market is also smart enough to judge if something is really innovative or less so.
That was actually one of my questions. Is the market smart enough to know? Because do we really know when we're inundated with all these marketing messages? Can the public really judge? Is this a true innovation, or is it a marketing ploy? Or is there a clear distinction between those two? Stephen?
Well, it's also innovation to have a clever marketing strategy, but it's not the topic here, so we'll leave that for another panel. But yeah, it's you can have an innovation within a traditional framework, which perhaps some of our work at Global 4C and through our foundation of Time Eon to preserve, safeguard and transmit traditional watchmaking techniques. That's innovative because the idea is to get one watchmaker to be able to make a complete watch in a very small workshop with very, very basic amount of equipment. But then you've got more disruptive innovation. So there it's you're breaking ground in terms of materials, technology, really the whole construction of a movement, or breaking out into the whole environment and design of the watch. And so, you know, there's really many areas. I think one of the things we see is that it's probably quite challenging for the collectors actually, because today the offer is so huge, because you have from one end you have a tiny telephone with a strap on it, which you put on your wrist, with a lot of smart technology. And then you have at the other end, you have something very traditional, very classic in terms of very traditional anchored watchmaking technology. So it's really different categories, I think, for me as more as a collector and watchmaker than representing a brand or, you know, Global 4C as such.
I think that Alexis brought a very good point. He brought a very good point, which is actually you cannot judge innovation on just one piece. You need several years to understand what is the impact of a new idea. You have some companies, they use innovation to bring out the big news, but at the end it's not very helpful. It's not really bring further. But that will be replied very soon, because it will not be copied or continued. It will be discontinued, this idea. So you really have to understand the quality of an innovation. You can only understand this after 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. If I may, just quickly, I think you need consistency. So the difficulty for a watchmaker, an independent watchmaker, you're starting out with very limited resource, and yet you have to try and get across your message of what you want to achieve, what you want to do, but you can't tell the public what you're going to do what you want to do for the next 10 years. So it's a very difficult challenge, because you have to let a little bit of information, and then you have to hope that the collectors and the public will follow you and support you. But if you don't have that strategy, that consistency over time, then you're going to lose the energy.
Alexis, you've probably got more experience outside of watches to look at what other industries are doing in terms of design and innovation and materials. Are there any exciting technologies or things that you've seen in other industries that you think watchmaking might profit from that, or at least start to investigate?
But I think that in the area of materials, there's a huge ground for innovation, which is constantly developed. I think, of course, it's more coming from, you know, engineering schools or technology of materials. Sometimes the engineers themselves don't know what to do with these materials they, let's say, invent. And I think that's where actually smart people, I mean, it can be watchmakers in this case, or basically designers, can really be curious enough to really go in that area and see what the properties of the material are, and then eventually see how they can use them, I don't know, for friction, for resistance, or other areas more close to watchmaking. I mean, it's always, I think, today innovation needs to have a look outside of, you know, the ground of watches. If you want to be innovative, you have to look around and it's I think quite often that if you look at big schools like I don't know, the MIT or the Polytechnic schools in Switzerland, which, you know, are there to bring innovation, but sometimes, as I was saying, they don't know what to do with it. Then if anybody which is really interested in that goes there, I think it's where the things meet, and then where a material can find its one of the possibilities of use.
If we can get a bit more specific now, I'd like to hear each of the panel members, some of the favorite new technologies or interesting things you think we should be, or you might be looking at, or the industry might be looking at, aside from secrets. We won't tell anyone.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, you know, as you mentioned, so Grobel 40, our idea with Robert Grobel and myself as watchmakers was to say, okay, we have a certain palette of tools, but what else can we bring? So we are always looking outside for other possibilities. But for us, it's we don't want to, you know, we realize that in fact you take a new material and it takes a very long time to prove that, because in terms of watchmaking, we have tried and trusted sort of basics which we can use in a way, like a jewel bearing, which, okay, there are some inconveniences with that, with oiling over time, but we know that it will run for 2 or 3, almost 400 years, because it's a technology which we have there. So we know that if we put that design and construct that into a movement, that technology is repeatable. So in terms of long term, it's something which is going to be reliable and performing well. And so it's a question of then building on that know-how. So, you know, for what we do, we have a laboratory in-house where from the very first movement we developed, we studied the performance and measured the performance, and then we slowly, over the years now, we've built up each different caliber enables us to answer one unknown in an equation. So we can add to our knowledge this way. So we are trying to build that, and sometimes there's some new technology. We've made some silicon escapement 10 years ago, but we've never put that in a watch for the public, because we want to see over a long time really how that works. So that's one example. You know.
One of the things I'd like you to mention as well, Felix, is electronics in watches.
So electronics in watches, that's a theme which is quite... In mechanical watches, that's quite sensitive. But actually for me it's not sensitive. So that's really something we just take that liberty at our work to go for whatever interests us.
Sorry, could you just explain EMC and what the electronics display in the mechanical watch?
So the EMC, we presented this watch 4 or 5 years ago, is actually monitoring the precision of the mechanical movement. So basically it's a 100% mechanical watch, the winding crown and all the features we know in a mechanical watch, but on top you have a sensor, a light, a laser looking to the balance wheel, counting the frequency and actually measuring the precision of that. So you are able to fine adjust yourself. So it was kind of a research teaching piece for us, and hopefully it opens somehow a respect in our little industry to start to be open for that horizon, because you have also, on the side of electronics, you have also artisanal electronics. Electronics, we also always think that it has to be Apple or Samsung, but actually they also have laboratories and they also make research in an artisanal way, and this is something which I love to combine, to bring into watchmaking. So this is this is what I'm working, and we will have next year a very important piece which follows that path of EMC. It's something we believe, but we are actually not making money with it at all. So it's really something we just do it because we love it, you know. So it remembers me in the beginning of our work. It was a total different approach we had, very minimalistic, and it took us 7-8 years to succeed, to get respect. And I hope it will take us a bit less with the electronic. But we come close to the 7-8 years already, so it takes us a bit longer, as I hoped in the beginning.
Alexis, when training new designers, do you start with the fundamental basics of the design and then innovation comes when they know the basics, or is that something that people have to be aware of from day one?
I think that when you train designers, innovation rhymes with creativity. So, I mean, you cannot say, okay, today we are innovative, tomorrow we are not, and then so on. I think it's, of course, again, what innovation are we talking about? Is it to revolutionize the industry, or just to bring a new idea which can be used almost instant way in everyday life? And I think when you, in the context of a school, I think that every design student thinks of them initially when they come to study as an innovator. And I think that they have to do it. They have to be curious, they have to be passionate, dynamic, and then even the slightest object that they will start designing for them is an innovation. Of course, the impact it can have is maybe none if you put it on the market as an innovation impact. But I don't think that's the issue. I think that everybody, at some point, when you're a designer, you bring new things. It can be something small, it can be something bigger. And for you, at that moment, it's something new. Then, of course, you put it in a context, and then you see that maybe it's not as new as you would think, or as impactful as you would think. But again, it's a school. It's in a school area. It's there to test the ground. It's there to push to learn how to be innovative too is very important, and to year by year during studies to learn about a method in a way, and also accept failure, accept the chance also, because many innovations have been arrived by chance also. It's not every time something pragmatic and organized. Of course, we give them. We try to give them some good ways. We have, a material library on one side. We have machines, 3D printing and so on, which also, are not innovation today anymore, but still can help to proof test some things. And then, of course, they are usually and always, very well tutored by professionals, which I think is also the way to transmit this kind of need of being innovative, of being curious. There's no machine which can teach you that.
You brought up silicon balances. This is probably silicon now in watchmaking, especially balance springs and small parts. It's probably been one of the biggest innovations. Whether a real innovation or not, we will discuss. But it's been one of the most pervasive innovations over the last few years, especially as Swatch Group seems to be slowly bringing it out, their silicon balances with most brands. Global 4C has been experimenting, not jumping on that bandwagon yet. You have mentioned that mechanical watches, they'll be working for hundreds of years. I'm guessing you're not going to wait that long to see if silicon is worth doing or not, but how do you know? How do you make the decision? And innovation is...
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, we made some silicon escapement for our own observation only. And so we wanted to see what are the problems, what are the challenges, are there real advantages for us? Because you can have a new material which gives production advantage, like the what we call the Liga process, where you take a mask and you actually grow material, or you take a wafer and you cut away. So these are this sort of new technology in a way, but this technology is already like more than 40 years old, because it comes from the integrated circuit and electronics industry largely. So for Global 4C, for us, we need to be sure that several things. It's got to bring an advantage over a traditional material, but not just short term, but also longer term. So you're looking at sort of after 10, 15 years of running, you can start to get an idea what's going to happen. But so you've got to have an advantage. So for us, that means an advantage in terms of performance. So, you know, we mentioned earlier with our innovative approach in terms of tourbillon for the wristwatch, we entered an international chronometry competition in 2011 with one of our watches, one of our pieces. And not only did we survive the whole rigors of the competition, but we held a performance between 0.3 and 0.8 seconds a day over the whole competition. So this, for us, this was a combination of innovative construction, completely new inclined tourbillon construction, but also using, in fact, only traditional basis but a lot of other innovations, but all based on traditional materials which we can master. So for us to go to a new material, we have to find an advantage there which is going to be significant. Until we can get better, we don't see, there's no advantage to bring that material, because for what we do, and for each watchmaker it's different, for what we do, we have so many other things to talk about before we mention a specific material component form. And just finally to go from a traditional technology where we can actually make these components ourselves to a modern technology where we don't master that. So we would have to only buy that in from outside, and we don't master that technology. For us, there's also that consideration for the future. What is going to be the response, and how can we imagine, will we be able to make silicon components as a small company in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years' time? I don't know. You know, these are questions out there.
Have you got any views on that, Felix?
Okay, the silicon development for the spirals, for example, of the Swatch Group is...
Sorry, just in case people don't understand, the balance spring of a watch is the little piece going like this, and it's setting the time. It's often not made, it can often be made in a magnetic material, so there are lots of things that can happen to especially a steel spring that will affect the timing. If it's made of silicon, it's not affected by magnetism, it's very light, so it's not affected so much by shock. So it has lots and lots of advantages, seemingly, but also a few disadvantages.
And one main advantage for a group is that you can cut cost. You need less réglage, like the man's work to regulate, to install the spiral. Actually, it's an industrial process where you have an industrial machine setting. So actually, it's the dream like of a big company like Rolex. They want actually, they try to actually eliminate their watchmakers since 30 years, and now they come closer and closer to that goal. Actually, that watchmakers somehow are replaced by machines and robots.
That would be an innovation.
And that's also an innovation.
Yeah.
We can kill ourselves. Even. That is,
yes, exactly.
It's a good,
we give up.
An interesting. This is a good point.
Yep.
Because we use that. You have actually two levels of innovation. You have groundbreaking fundamental research of new values, new directions, or you can refine traditional watchmaking in, let's say, more precise and better. So we for example, use also the Ligat technique for one thing. We saw in the Patek Philippe Museum Louis Gauthier watch with a linear time indication, made in 1958, and it is a beautiful watch. It is like a Uhrwerk 50 years ago. So it was really nice to discover this piece. But actually, when I talked with Sven Andersen, he restored that piece at Patek Philippe Museum, and he said it's only working in one position. So actually, why? Because the lever which is transmitting the power is too heavy. So It's a prototype. They never achieved that piece into a series of a watch. So at Patek Philippe. So we decided to take it over because we saw in parallel that the Liga technique enables us to make very light pieces, to make a lever which is very light to transmit that power. So finally we were able to release that old idea of Louis Gauthier of the 1958. So we are using actually the invention of the technical side this way.
That's quite a good point. That the new technologies now are enabling us to do things that we couldn't do in the past. When I say us, you. Alexis, it must have been frustrating. Well, I suppose it's always the same, but for designers, you might come up with a great idea, but to be told by sensible engineers, that's impossible. Over the last 10 years, and maybe it's over the last 100 years, it seems like today nearly everything is possible. We see, especially for watches now, it's hard to even know that it's a watch. They really are bits of sculpture. Has that been an uncomfortable change, or has that been a refreshing for the watch designers and designers in general?
I think that the design profession has evolved a lot, and it still does. As you said, I quite agree. Everything is possible right now. The only question is it relevant? Because to do possible things, everybody can do possible things. Then is it relevant in the context of a watch, a furniture piece, a car, or whatever else that you can have around you as a human being? And this relevance, I think, is more and more taking the place of can we make it or not? Because at the end, to have so much choice is amazing, is great, but then do we still, does it make sense to make something if it's maybe not useful, or if it's completely, I would say, even useless? And technology can, enables everything. Materials have been, going wild. Who would have imagined that, carbon fiber, which was developed, for like the automotive industry initially, or spatial industry, now you can find it, everywhere, in a watch case.
What should we be looking for next?
I'm not a prophet in any sense.
Please, this is your chance.
No, I think that, I think the quest for materials, if I venture there, I think is to make lighter, stronger, easier to manufacture things. Easier, with of course going slowly into making it easier. But I think that again, these materials, without the input of a designer, will not remain. Will just be materials.
Can you give examples? Name some materials.
Okay, carbon fiber is one thing. I don't know. You have.
Graphene. Graphene.
Okay. Things like that, or even transparent materials. We have watches. Many brands do them, which are completely transparent. That was not the case. Even sapphire before was just for the glass. Now you can have a full watch, and who knows what next. So
hopefully you.
But I think
we're trying.
Okay.
But I think it's interesting. We say that everything seems possible, but in fact, when you stop, you only know what we know. And in fact, if we think in a much larger dimension of the universe, we know very little. And in fact, everything was impossible until somebody asked the right question, and suddenly it becomes possible. So it is, as you mentioned, very important in training and education. But this spirit of innovation is way deeper. I think it's a state of mind that you have or you don't have, to want to inquire, to be curious, to go out there, and ask yourself crazy questions. A fairly famous gentleman 500 years ago drew a helicopter. Look how long it took us to actually make one. It took 450 years nearly to make one. So there are ideas out of their time, and Felix, I think it's fantastic that Uhrwerk, because fine watchmaking and mechanical watchmaking is there's a knife edge, and you're running on the knife edge, even what we do sometimes in terms of some use of technology for some process or perhaps for case finish. And Felix has really pulled off an amazing challenge with the EMC to have some electronic element there with a mechanical base. And this is very interesting because again we see something, a disruptive innovation, if I can say that.
Yes, yes, but for sure it's not easy to find the right concept, you know, to integrate new technology, invention, and actually on the electronical part in the EMC is actually helping, let's say, the mechanical movement, and it's involving the collector to be able to be part actually of his own mechanical watch. So it's as we said before, it's actually the time which will show if something is relevant, or if an innovation is relevant or not. We just saw now Zenith coming with a 20 hertz new kind of balance wheel. I think it's very, very interesting to discover that. It will be also very interesting to see in the next 2-3 years how is the long-term functioning of a movement like that. But and another question, and this is the fundamental question, is for me: is it really helpful? Is it nice? Is it appreciable to see, to have that movement in the watch? Is it something which gives you something or not? For me, does it create an emotion to you, a positive emotion? This is actually very interesting in our industry, that you have so many values which come together, and at the end, it's over time you can understand if it's relevant or not.
Okay, I think that's our time nearly up now. I'd like to put it to the audience.
The presentation that Patek did at Basel of their advanced research watch, which is the idea of compliant engineering, i.e., using sort of design to sort of reduce the number of components, etc. I just wonder whether, particularly Felix and Stephen, had any reaction to this, were thinking about, compliance as a methodology at all. Or am I making any sense?
I'm not sure what you mean. Compliance sounds to me like an audit.
No, okay.
Which is something which is anathema to a watchmaker.
They explained it better at Patek and Zenith than I can now. Yeah. But it's the idea of using design and new materials and things like Liga to create components that that are single components rather than one. Yeah. So rather than having a pincer that's got sort of
lever, a spring, and
you make it all out of one piece like the Zenith.
Well, if we just quickly, if we think about watchmaking, in fact, through the centuries, we started 500 years ago with the tower clock. Then 100 years later, we made maybe a wall clock or a table clock. And then another 50 years, or we get portable timepiece. And then we make it miniaturized, but often based all around the same concept. So, and then 20th century, the wristwatch came. We managed to get to a wristwatch size, but then we tried to either make the whole thing smaller, or we tried to make it thinner. So a little bit, like you say, a sort of simplification, but quite two-dimensional in a way. So, something that we have been working with, and this silicon that we made escapement. We also made a diamond balance wheel and spring 10 years ago, but the technology was not there really to be able to make it how we wanted to at that time. And yet it opened up a whole avenue of possibility to us in our laboratory with what we call EWT, Experimental Watch Technology, which we first talked about in 2005, and still even Ian doesn't understand it. He's been following it since then. He's tried many times to explain it, but but this brought us to think about the three problems we have as watchmaker. One is space, and energy, and then the complexity of a mechanism. So, and we, with Robert and our team, we've been working the last 10 years, and we actually talked about this in SIHH briefly. It's called mechanical nano, and it's not just to make smaller parts, because there we are kept with these constraints that we had before. But it's to go beyond that and to look at the space, and more particularly the energy. And so there is in there also a possibility for simplification of mechanism. And we already showed a demonstrator where we had gained over 60% of the space available by applying a whole bunch of different approach, innovative, very disruptive in a lot of ways. So we took a mechanism which had maybe 60 components, and it's down to like 4. So, you know, this is something where it's very exciting and interesting, because if we could just gain half of the space for a mechanism, then we can do really some incredible things. But then we have to work with that, and it takes a lot of time.
I have a question for Tree. What do you think of cheap watches, innovation, example in Tissot watches, if you know? What do you think? Innovation in the cheap watches.
Cheap watches. Just Tissot as an example.
Tissot is a big challenge.
The Swatch is a good example.
You know, so that's for sure. Tissot was in the 80s, 90s, 2000. It was really very technical, actually advanced with the latest technology, the quartz. It was very sports direction. So it was really the latest thing. And now, for sure, they get overpassed. So you go into mechanic, yeah.
I mean, you know, there is maybe an interesting thing that we have to think about in the watch industry after the, you know, from 1950s, 60s until the advent of quartz and electronic. It was all mechanical, and so the difficulty was to democratize that, so to make it cheaper, and to make it cheaper to fabricate, to produce, to assemble. There was no robotization then. So the problem was that you got very cheap watches, but they were often badly made, because you needed to cut the corners to make a reliable, good watch, to be able to make it cheaper.
Hi guys. My question is a bit more general, and it's about innovation hubs. So Switzerland was important for innovation watchmaking throughout the years. And my question is, I mean, Stephen, you made the move to Switzerland to start it there. And my question is, for today, with today's technology and connection that we're having, is it still important for people to make moves where there are specific places that you can start in for watchmaking, or people can start anywhere unlike it before? And if the question is yes, then do you still think that Switzerland is the place, or that has moved around?
Could I just suggest you start this with Fiona, that story about Fiona?
I mean, I said it before to the previous panel. We have a student, a former student, which she's from Scotland, so no link with watchmaking whatsoever. She arrived in Lausanne at ECAL. She did her diploma project. She designed a watch because she wanted to do it. You know, she felt that it was a good place to develop that. And that watch then, you know, became the beginning of a brand, which exists right now and does pretty well. So I think that, in my then personal point of view, it's Fiona Kruger. She does the Skull watches, and it still, you know, develops new projects now and also collaborates with other brands.
I would recommend that everyone who hasn't heard of Fiona Kruger just type her name into Google and have a look at the watches. You will see it's got a strong, clear identity.
But I think that at the end, it's you can, of course, as you can, you know, work as a designer in the other side of the world and just communicate by emails. You can do it, yes. But at the moment that you want to really be in the center of, you know, of watchmaking, you have to go through that and go to Switzerland at some point and also see where things are made. Is it in big scale or small scale? That's another question. But I think that it's important to also at one minute, you know, go there and spend some time.
Okay, thank you very much. I think our time is up now. Hope to see you at the next one.